Yeah, good morning. It's 4 minutes after 9 on Monday, the 14th of May. It is Ring Rees-Mogg. Just telling you what else is coming up in this hour. Later in the hour, the NHS, it is revealed, is spending nearly £1.5 billion a year on temporary nursing staff to cope with shortages, according to new research. We'll have that for you. And also in the hour, the idea that the MPs will be voting on a petition of the Grenfell inquiry, a public petition there, as part of the Grenfell inquiry to deliver truth and justice. We'll be speaking, of course, that's the result of the decision taken on Friday to broaden the remit and some of the experts that are taking part in that. But it is, as we said at the start of the hour, Ring Rees-Mogg with Conservative MP for North East Somerset and prominent Brexit campaigner Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's in the studio with me. And before I go to your first questions, Thomas, you're going to be the first caller. It seems fair to say, Mr. Rees-Mogg, everybody is revolting. From the Lords to students, I learned yesterday, who might take to the streets in unprecedented numbers, or that's what they're saying. How concerned are you by this rebellion at just about every end of the age scale? Morning.
Good morning, and what pleasure it is to be here on a bright and breezy Monday morning. The Lords, I think, is breaking the constitutional conventions, and this is quite important, that there's the Salisbury-Addison Convention, which means the Lords does not overturn specific manifesto promises, and it's done that in its amendments to the withdrawal bill, and actually it's looking to do that potentially again today on an issue surrounding free speech. And our constitution works if people follow the conventions, and then an unelected House has a proper role to play as a check on the executive, as a revising chamber. But if it sets itself up as peers against the people, then they're overreaching themselves. So at that point, being revolting becomes serious. As for students, I think it is part of the role in life of students to indicate their displeasure with the establishment, and it would be a rather feeble society where students just went along politely with everything that the establishment said. Lastly,
before we come to Thomas's call, does it, though, speak to younger people a sense of dissatisfaction? They are saying that it's their futures that is being dealt with. You're closer to their age than I am, but that it's old fogies like thee and me are not thinking of where their lives might take them.
No, I think in terms of the Brexit debate, that the great opportunities for everybody, but particularly the younger generation, are in leaving and looking to the broader horizon of the rest of the world rather than the narrow, closed, protectionist European field. So for younger people, leaving is the best opportunity that they could have.
Let's go to some of these calls. First up is Thomas in Wadebridge in Cornwall. Thomas, good morning. You're on the radio.
Oh, good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Yes. Your question is to do with the House of Lords, I think, Thomas. Go ahead.
Yes. Mr. Rees-Mogg, sir, in returning the proposed legislation to the Commons with the changes that it did make, is the House of Lords scrutinising the legislation to ensure it's fit for its intended purpose of leaving the EU, or is the House of Lords rewriting the legislation to the opposite purpose?
Well, you touched a little bit briefly on that, Mr. Rees-Mogg, if you'll expand for Thomas's benefit.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you for calling in, because I think your question gets to the heart of what's been going on. There are 14 amendments that the Lords has passed, and some of these are the routine business of revising law. So when it comes to Henry VIII powers, that is to say the powers that ministers will take to change primary legislation, that's a proper matter for the Lords to deal with. It's not something that formed part of the referendum. It's not something that was in manifestos. It is a technical, internal, parliamentary matter, and the Lords is right to bring their experience to bear to that. On issues such as the customs union and the date of departure, these were clear commitments at the last election. The customs union explicitly, the date of departure implicitly. And in amending those, the House of Lords was exceeding its power and breaching the conventions. So I think it's worth looking at the amendments one by one. And within that, you're absolutely right, Thomas, some of what they've done is to rewrite the law. And when you listen to their speeches, some of them were quite hysterically anti-Brexit. Lord Billamoria saying that he wanted to stop the train wreck that was Brexit. Lord Hailsham saying that he viewed the referendum as at best an interim decision. The sort of condescension and the arrogance expressed towards the referendum is really quite surprising. And the aim of the Lords is to block Brexit, not to amend the legislation.
Although were they here, I sense perhaps one of those Lords would say that they cannot stand by, and as they would say, and see the country effectively chunter off a cliff.
Well, the British electorate voted to leave the European Union, and they voted then for a party that had leaving the customs union and the single market in its manifesto. What makes the Lords think that they know better? What is their superior mystical wisdom that gives them a greater insight than the British people?
Some of them would point to British business and British industry, saying that they're very concerned not being in the customs union, the single market.
It depends which industry you ask. If you ask vested interests who benefit from a protectionist market and the EU-funded CBI, yes, of course, they want to protect their vested interest. What I'm interested in helping are consumers by reducing the prices of food, clothing and footwear and moving the very high tariffs on those that primarily protect continental rather than British businesses. And a reduction in the price of food, clothing and footwear helps the least well off in our society the most. And the Lords are trying to block that to put higher costs on the least well off in our society.
And so you can make an assurance to my listeners that the cost of their food, clothing and footwear will come down.
Well, unless the government were bonkers, and I don't think the government is bonkers, that the setting of tariffs will be a matter for the government once we've left. The average tariff on food is 22%. Let's get rid of it.
Thank you. More calls. Alan, thank you, Thomas. Alan in Gloucester, you're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Go ahead, Alan.
Hello there, Jacob.
Hello, Alan. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm just questioning the fitness of Mrs May to govern after the fiasco of the Windrush debacle when the Home Secretary took the can for her, and also the unprecedented defeats of the government in the Lords, whether or not you think that the Backbench 22 committee should reconvene and ask her to step down for the good of the government and the country, and we have an election where we actually vote a leader in that actually voted to leave.
No, I don't agree with you on that, Alan. I think that on the issue of the House of Lords defeats, the Constitutional Convention is that the Prime Minister has to command a majority in the House of Commons, and that's a very long-standing convention, and not in the House of Lords. And if you want, you can look at the Don Pacifico affair, when Palmerston lost a vote of confidence in the Lords, but won one in the Commons, and therefore carried on. And that, whenever that was, 1850-something. And so there's a very strong, long-lasting Constitutional Convention of that kind. On the issue of Windrush, actually, I think the Home Secretary didn't need to resign over that. I think that she made an error, but in a department with so much going on, to have missed one paper over the last couple of years, it would have been almost inhuman to have been able to have seen every paper. And I think Amber Rudd is a very capable person, but to have missed one paper oughtn't to have been a resigning offence. But that's my view. As regards Brexit negotiations, I think Mrs May is the Geoffrey Boycott of negotiations. She's playing a straight bat. She's not giving a great deal away. I probably know as much about her approach as anybody else does. But I think this steady, stable approach is the right one to be taking and is in the national interest. And we will know in October whether I'm right or not.
Well, to keep that, I'll come back to you in a second, but perhaps Alan's suggesting we need an Ian Botham figure to come in and tonk the ball. I know you're a keen fan of cricket and you follow Somerset, and tonk the ball about a little bit, perhaps. Take the game to take the attack to the bowlers, to the EU.
Well, the risk with that is that you lose a wicket, and I think we're probably at the stage where we don't want to lose too many wickets. But Alan, what do you think further on that?
Jacob, you're very, very intelligent. I'll go with you with this, and I know that you're on the committee, and my local MP, Richard Graham, is with you as well, and you're two very sensible people. So yes, I think you've convinced me.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you for calling from Gloucester.
Alan, thank you. We'll return to Brexit in a moment. Other matters, though. Jean in Stanmore. You're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Good morning, Jean.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning, Jean.
Good morning. I would like to know if it's not time that we had a law that assisted people with dying with dignity. My husband, who was 91, died 6 weeks ago. And towards the end, I would gladly have given him where they weren't allowed to. I mean, the National Health Hospital he was in was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But it was so sad to see this giant of a man just crumbled into nothing.
Stay on the line, if you would. This has been brought into contrast, of course, by the death of Dr. David Goodall, who was born in Britain but actually lived in Australia. He travelled from his home in Australia to Switzerland, to the Dignitas clinic, to end his life. He was aged 104. He wasn't ill, and he was in emotionally robust condition as well. He just pretty much said he'd had enough. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I think it's a very difficult issue, because I think there is a borderline between alleviating pain and actively deciding to kill somebody, and that you have to be very careful about crossing that borderline, because you then create circumstances that may put pressure on people to end their lives who don't want to. They may be pressurized because they feel that they've become a burden to their family and to society. Sometimes families are not as loving as they might be and may pressurize elderly people. And I think that's really very difficult, and that the clarity of the law, that you may alleviate pain and that it is legal for an individual to commit suicide, ensures that there aren't abuses. And countries that have adopted euthanasia have found that abuses have come in, and that there have been cases where people have been killed who didn't really want to be. And I think that's too great a risk to take, and that it changes one's fundamental relationship with the healthcare service. The healthcare service is there to look after you. It's not there to kill you. And I accept that in individual circumstances, when people are reaching the end of their life, this is very hard. But I think the hospice movement is wonderful in the way it helps people, families as well as the person who is dying, and that the alleviation of pain is the absolute priority towards death.
Quick reaction from Eugene from what you've heard.
Well, I would very much like to. I'm 86 years old. I'm in pretty good health, but I would like the right to put in words and in writing of how I feel about it, about the dignity. I don't want to lose. My husband lost all his dignity. And I think there has to be a way. There was no hope whatsoever. And I think in conjunction with the doctors and the families, that if it comes to a point where they are on the point of death, to just give them something that will just gently take them off. It's much kinder. You don't do it to animals.
Final comment on that, if you would, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I'm afraid I think there are too many difficulties with that, and it would be too easy to have people being killed for the feeling pressurized by the system. And we should never forget, this is what Harold Shipman did. He went round pushing over the edge people who were old and frail.
Yeah, it was against their will, of course.
It was against their will.
Suggesting that.
But how much will do people necessarily have in that very frail end state? How clear can that be? And even if people said it before, is that what they really intend at that late stage? Can you know? And I think that's very, very difficult.
All right. Jean, thank you. Let's come to the texts, tweets and emails that are coming in. This comes in from Wendy of West Wickham. And in fact, this speaks to the problems that you said earlier about the House of Lords. Does Jacob Rees-Mogg agree that Ed Miliband was wrong to try and bring about the vote that would have muzzled the press? And this, of course, is coming back before the Lords. I read that there's the Lords vote today on whether to open a new version of the Leveson inquiry onto press standards and regulation. To remind listeners, of course, your father was a very eminent newspaper editor at the time. So was it Sir William or Lord Rees-Mogg in the end?
Both, but he ended up Lord
Rees-Mogg.
Rees-Mogg.
Lord Rees-Mogg.
Yes.
Edited the Times for many years with considerable distinction. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I agree with Wendy. I mean, I think that the amendment is deeply disgraceful. It's about essentially creating double jeopardy for journalists, many of whom have been tried. And we were in the position in this country of having more journalists on trial than some dictatorships. And this is something we should be ashamed of, that the freedom of press is very valuable and easily attacked. And it's not just by formal censorship, it's by self-censorship. And what was so great about our system is that when these cases got to juries, they said the official who had given the information was guilty of abuse of position, but the journalist who received it was not, and by and large they were found not guilty.
All but one.
All but one. And it reinforces my confidence in the jury system. The juries only found one guilty, everyone else not guilty. Why should they go back in front of a judge to be quizzed again on what they've been cleared of? I think it's outrageous, against the British Constitution, and frankly it's all about eating bacon sandwiches and looking silly in the papers. And the self-interest of it is beneath Mr. Miliband's dignity, who actually I think is rather an able British political figure.
To the questions, David in St Albans. David, you're on the radio. Go ahead. Morning to you.
Good morning, Nick.
Morning,
Good morning, Jacob.
Good morning, David.
Morning. Regarding the portrait of Margaret Thatcher at the Oxford University, when I heard, I thought this is definitely a political move, not necessarily by the students, but by forces behind them. And I just wonder what your opinion is on this. I feel it's a left-wing movement going on.
And this is the decision that the Geography Department, which of course is where Mrs May studied at Oxford, to take down. There are portraits of many other former students there, empowering various aspects of how the women, of how they have put powerful careers. But Mrs May no longer graces those walls. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, David, I think you're broadly right. I think had it been a portrait of a famous left-wing geographer who'd become Prime Minister, even if some students had complained, even if some students had vandalised it, the Geography Department at Oxford would unquestionably have put it back and would have secured it. And there was this great prejudice against Margaret Thatcher when they wouldn't give her an honorary degree. And it's rather sad that Oxford doesn't rejoice in having two such distinguished figures who passed through its hallowed halls. And is, frankly, slightly dismissive of them, and I think that's a mistake, and it reflects badly on the Geography Department.
Remind me where you attended university.
I was at Oxford, so it's
which college?
I was at Trinity.
What would happen if I took a picture of you around Trinity College and showed it to current students? How do you imagine that would go down?
Most of them wouldn't know who I was, so it wouldn't get you very far. So anyway, David, I agree with you. But do you have any further thoughts on it?
Well, I think it's that the university and a lot of education is in the hands of the left. Definitely, it's indoctrination. And I don't know if you are aware that there was a march for freedom of speech last weekend, and it didn't get reported in any of the papers. Thousands of people in Whitehall. And
did we talk about this? This is for the. Now, let me remind myself here. This is somebody who was coming from Austria, from a far-right movement in Austria, was it? Right. Yes. Yes.
Selma.
Yes.
And his girlfriend.
Yes. But if you remember, David, we did some research and we discovered that he's for the forced patriation of immigrants. Do you remember? And that's not necessarily the British way, David. You remember we talked about this?
Yes, but freedom of speech, you see, Nick.
I know. I hear you. I don't know whether Mr. Rees-Mogg is aware of that story. So, David, thank you. No, David, always good speaking with you. We'll speak again soon. Let's move on. It's not really fair if he's not aware of the background, so it's a fairly contentious one, so let's move on to other matters. Thank you, David. Mario in Dulwich, you're on the radio. Go ahead, Mario, your question.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, Mario.
Hi. Do you think more money pledged by the government for grammar schools is a good idea?
Yes, I do. That the results achieved by grammar schools are extremely impressive.
Some would say they would be, wouldn't they? If you have the brightest children, if we're each running a school and you take the brightest kiddies and I'm left with, I don't want to say, but the rest, well, obviously your results are going to be better.
Well, the aim must be to make all schools as good as grammar schools rather than to stop grammar schools expanding and being as good as they are. But if you can take more pupils into grammar schools, then you can give more the best education. And this is the difference, frankly, between socialism and conservatism. That the conservative wants everybody to succeed to the maximum of his or her ability and does not resent the fact that some in the end will do better than the others. The socialist is aiming for equality of outcome, but to get equality of outcome you have to cut down the tall poppies, and that reduces the educational success of our nation. So yes, I'm supportive of the £50 million that is being put towards more grammar schools or expanding grammar schools.
Mario?
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with what Jacob said. I think it's very interesting how opponents of this move, particularly in the education sector, focus exclusively on disadvantaged children, but as Jacob said, you need to fish out all of the talent from those lower economic backgrounds, because we can try and think of each other in terms of equality, but talent, ability is unequal, and we should give those kids a chance and really cherish the opportunity to help them succeed in life.
Quick response from you.
Well, I agree with Mario. Yes. I think it's the nail on the head.
All right, you agree with Mario. I wonder if you agree with Nick, which was, of course, a famous slogan from a couple of general elections ago, because earlier this morning I was speaking with Sir Nick Clegg. He was Nick Clegg at the time of that election, of course, who, along with Nicky Morgan and David Miliband, are speaking at a rice factory in Essex later today about the dangers of a Brexit, and he left you this question.
Why is he becoming, unwittingly perhaps, a protectionist? I always thought people like Rees-Mogg believed in those good, stout British traditions of free and open trade, and yet by casting aside our biggest neighbouring markets for the wholly illusory benefit of somehow striking new trade deals with Papua New Guinea and other far-flung countries, he actually will be overseeing and introducing an immense wave of protectionism. Why is Rees-Mogg a protectionist? There you go. That's my question for him.
Summing it up, well, there you go. Why are you?
Well, of course I'm not. Sir Nick has rather missed the point that when we leave the European Union, we will be out of the protectionist customs union. The customs union applies tariffs of 22% on average on food. It's over 11% on clothing and footwear. Once we've left, we can get rid of these as a unilateral act. We will be free to open up our markets to the huge benefits of consumers. This is a real opportunity for free trade. It's why I've actually shared a platform with economists for free trade, because that's where the benefits of leaving the European Union come from. It's why it's essential to leave the customs union. The customs union protects, for example, Spanish orange growers at the expense of British consumers. Now, I wish Spanish orange growers every success, and their oranges make lovely marmalade, and that's all splendid. But I don't think my constituents in North East Somerset should pay higher prices to protect continental producers. So I'm the one who's for free trade. The customs union is a protectionist racket about protecting inefficient continental industries. Take cars, 10.2% tariff on cars coming in from outside the European Union. Why should our cars, made in Japan, very good cars, be 10.2% more expensive than a Mercedes? Doesn't make any sense.
Thank you. To Sandra in Medway. Your question, Sandra. Go ahead. Morning to you.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, I'm a real fan of Jacob. I just wondered if he understands the frustration of Leave voters that Theresa May's heart doesn't seem to be in it. I mean, I've just listened to Jacob there. He's so positive. And he just makes you all think, yes, let's just get on with it. We've got so much to look forward to. And we just don't get that from Theresa May. We get something, but we just don't get that, that
passion,
power that we can do. The passion, passion. Where is her passion?
Where is her passion? Jacob, you could display passion there for Sandra. Where is Mrs May's passion?
Well, first of all, Sandra, thank you so much. What an uplifting call to get at nearly 9:30 in the morning. I'm very grateful. I think that Theresa May and I are very different personalities, and that the Prime Minister is very thorough and very well prepared and puts her case quite dryly. But I don't think that means she doesn't believe it. And I think one of her great qualities, it's to go back to this boycott analogy, is that she is very good at keeping her wicket, keeping her head down, and making sure that slowly but surely the runs accumulate.
Not the most flamboyant cricketer, was he?
No, absolutely. And
quite keen to run others out, one has to say,
when he scored his 246, I think it was, highest test score against India, he did so slowly he was dropped for the next test. and so sometimes it was difficult. But nonetheless, he holds some of the best records of any batsman in our history, and I think the only batsman to have averaged over 100 twice in a county season.
Right.
So very, very impressive, capable, but not flamboyant, and except as a commentator, where he's actually very flamboyant.
Yes, he is great fun. Yeah.
But I think that's the analogy, and I think that's where we can have confidence in the Prime Minister.
Sandra, I don't know how good your cricket knowledge is, but you have do you want to come back to Jacob Rees-Mogg?
Yeah, I understand what he means, but I just think because she doesn't come across with that passion, she opens it up to all the people, the naysayers, the doom and gloom of Brexit. I think if everyone was so positive, I know it sounds, positive's not going to get us through this, we need more. But,
yes.
I just think you have to be a bit more upbeat to make everyone else perhaps think, yeah, she can do this.
Okay, but don't give the wicket away. I wonder if I can just thank you very much, Sandra. Just staying with us. Michael Gove was saying on television yesterday that we need to crack on. One of the things we need to do is crack on. We have an implementation period giving us an additional 21 months, suggesting that perhaps not moving as quickly, a boycott-like innings. Is Mr Gove onto something there?
Well, I think there is the opportunity for the government to crack on, but we'll know what we're cracking on with by October. It'll all be much clearer. And I think we are possibly at the point of maximum uncertainty now. The negotiations are coming to a crunch. Decisions will have to be made. By October, we'll have a pretty good outline of what's happening. The Remainers are fighting their last rearguard action to try and stop Brexit, and they're doing it in the House of Lords, and there's this grouping that's come out today. If that doesn't succeed, I think this is the last gasp of their effort, and then we're on to what the negotiation says, what is going to be implemented, and that I think will make the Prime Minister's position much easier.
How relevant is it if you look at the politicians, or former politicians in companies, Sir Nick Clegg, David Miliband and Nicky Morgan, two of those three actually represent constituents where they voted Leave. What does that say about the whole democratic process to you of those three?
Well, it's very interesting, the disconnect between the British political establishment.
I mean, South Shields, Mr. Matt, was a massive Leave constituency.
Huge. I went to South Shields with Channel 4 News sometime before the referendum, and it was really interesting. The general message people gave to me is that the Conservatives don't try here because you never win, and Labour takes us for granted because Labour always wins. And there was a great feeling of disconnect and disappointment with politics. And I think that came through in Brexit. And the job of politicians is to make that connection again, but that has to be done by respecting what people have said and not telling them we know best.
Time to get on to one other matter. We're taking you to global affairs with our last question. Clark in Oxford. Clark, you're on the radio. Good morning.
Good morning, Jacob.
Good morning, Clark.
I would like to ask you the same question I asked Nick Clegg a couple of years ago about the United Nations. And would you like to know Nick Clegg's answer before or after you answer?
I don't mind, whichever you think best.
Okay, I'll ask you the question. So the question was, why does the UK take unilateral action, for example, to bomb Syria a few days before the inspectors had a chance to inspect, instead of working more closely with the UN? Because effectively we are undermining the UN. And what would be your answer?
Yeah, I'll come back to you for then Nick, now Sir Nick's answer. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, the truth is that the Security Council in the UN is dysfunctional as long as Russia wishes to wield its veto against any sensible things that it might decide to do, and that's issues in our relationship with Russia and the US relationship with Russia and the activities of Mr. Putin. The UN only works when all 5 permanent members want to get things done, and that is a rare concurrence of atoms.
Quick response. Well, let's hear what Nick...
what did Nick Clegg say?
Nick Clegg said effectively that the UN is dysfunctional. But I would make...
I agree with Nick. Oh, dear.
We did get it out of you.
Shouldn't we strengthen it? Work more closely with it?
Well, we should try and work with the other permanent members, but ultimately you can't wait for Russia to change its mind. Things need to take place within the world, and the UK needs to recognise it's got global responsibilities with its allies. And if we just sit back and do nothing and wait for the UN, we'll be waiting for a very long time.
All right, Clark, thank you. I finish with a personal question. Before we meet again, a little event of a royal wedding will be taking place, Mr. Rees-Mogg. Will you be intending to watch that or listen to it on the television, or do you let these things pass you by?
Well, I would be watching it, but I'm actually going to another friend's wedding on that day, which clashes. So I will probably hear a bit of it on the radio going to the wedding.
OK, well, thank you. We look forward to seeing you and enjoy your friends' celebrations to come. Jacob Rees-Mogg appearing here on LBC, where it's 9:31 and the news is next.